everyone. Just getting set up. Early still.
Hi everyone.
I can see that you're there, Chloe. That's good.
Hello.
You're the first one that's just joined seamlessly, so well done.
Perfect. Always a solid start.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll attempt to share the slides. Have they come up all right? Then it's smoother than anticipated. That's always a good start.
I know we've got that awkward just waiting to it's time to start, isn't it? But yeah, you're all good, I think.
No, I'd rather that than be faffing around trying to get the slides to share in that last minute panic. So
Do you have your keywords in the PowerPoint, Chloe?
yeah, I've got them in there.
Yeah, brilliant. And we'll be keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A for you and kind of
Perfect.
questions at the end.
Yeah, no, lovely. If there's anything that's sort of burning urgent, feel free to stop me and yeah, jump in.
Do.
Oh, sorry, Susie. I just saw your message on there.
For those joining, we're just waiting until it's time for the talk to start. Let everybody sort of drift in and then we'll make a start. I think we'll start in 1 or 2 minutes, Chloe, just in case there's anyone running a bit late.
Yeah, no, perfect. Do let me know when we're good to go, and then I'm happy to make a
Just waiting
start.
for the numbers to level off a little bit. I think they're starting to.
Yeah, no, excellent. It's yeah, always slightly nerve-wracking when you can see the numbers climbing, isn't it? When you're just attending the webinar, you can't actually see who's there. So not sure if that's a good feature or not. But nice to see some names I recognise.
Yeah, I think I'd rather I couldn't see the number really, but yeah, it is nice when you see people that you know. Okay, I think it's time, Chloe. Are you happy to
Brilliant. Thanks
introduce
ever so much,
yourself?
Susie.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, yeah, firstly, a big thank you to everyone for booking to come to my talk today. Certainly wasn't expecting three figures of numbers of people come in. So massive thank you to everyone for taking the time. Today I will be exploring the paper myself and my lovely colleague Jen have recently published in the Tizard Learning Disability Review, which will be included in the PBS special edition. I've had the real privilege of being a guest editor for, so lots of the papers today kind of all feature in that special edition. So really excited to see some of those bits and pieces coming out. But the paper that we'll be discussing today is, kind of outlines our practice-based evaluation on implementing system-wide positive behaviour support through capable environments. So that's what we'll be looking at today. A bit about myself for those of you that might not know me. So I'm Chloe, or Chloe Ann Elmer May, lots of names. I'm a UK BA Cert and I work at the lovely Supporting Positively. I know a few of the team have joined today, so hello to them. And I'm a senior behaviour consultant at Supporting Positively. Part of the work that we do, we kind of work alongside people, teams and organisations to improve lives through thoughtful and sustainable support. We very much kind of, our approach is grounded in values-led evidence-based practice, and that's been shaped by our vast experience in positive behaviour support, and very much through learning, which we'll discuss some of the learning we've done today, and development, and kind of focus on that systems improvement. In addition to my role at Supporting Positively, some of you might kind of recognise me as well. I also co-chair the UK SBA PBS Special Interest Group alongside the alongside the wonderful Hannah. I know we had lots of Hannahs at the intro, but yeah, the Hannah Newcomb, and kind of we've kind of chaired that for the last couple of years as well. I've got a particular interest in system-wide PBS, so working with organisations to strategically support them to ensure that kind of their infrastructures and support systems are in place to achieve organisation positive change, particularly around good quality staff support. So really passionate about making sure that staff are really supported in the role, because we know they're always kind of key to implementing positive behaviour support, and making sure that kind of the practice-based evaluation that we'll go through today kind of really helps with that area I'm interested in. So hopefully it's gone on to the next slide, Susie. Fabulous. Just some acknowledgements before I started. I wanted to kind of make sure that these people have been recognised. So firstly to the wonderful Jen Knight, who I've had the pleasure of working alongside when undertaking this work and when writing it up. So Jen's unable to be presenting alongside myself today, but it was really important. I felt that her contributions are recognised, and my sincere thanks goes to her for making all of this possible. Also to Dr. Sandy Toogood. So he provided lots of invaluable guidance and support throughout both the project and in the preparation of this paper, alongside kind of the organisations who took part, because obviously it wouldn't have been possible without them. So their staff teams and the individuals supported for their time, commitment and engagement throughout the project. Thanks goes to Lucy and Tash as well. So they helped co-develop the capable environments tool we'll talk about. And lastly to Norfolk County Council, who commissioned us to undertake this work. So I felt it was really important to make sure we acknowledged them at the start, because without them all it wouldn't have been possible. So in terms of today's presentation, it will largely cover the published paper. So that will start by describing the study objectives, and I'll provide some of the background context for the study. I'll discuss the rationale and supporting literature used in the development of the study, outline the processes of implementing the framework and some of the bits that we found that hopefully will help you guys in terms of the practice that you're doing. I'll share feedback from the providers, and providing the technology allows, there's a lovely video of one of the providers providing some verbal feedback as well about his experience using the PBS service. And then lastly, I'll discuss what we learned and the next steps. So during this, I'll also share some of the updates made to the module described in the pilot based upon our learning, and share some suggestions for future research. So they're the bits that I'll aim to cover today. So in terms of the study objectives, the study aimed to assess the feasibility and acceptability of a brief consultant-facilitated system-wide PBS model, and this targeted the capable environment's organisational domains across 2 adult IDD service providers. So within the study, we outlined 3 kind of key objectives. And the first of these was to strengthen the evidence base for capable environments as a universal support. And this is with specific reference to the 3 organisational domains of the capable environments framework that we'll talk through in a little bit more detail for those of you that might not be as familiar with capable environments. We also aim to assess the social validity of the approach, which essentially means we wanted to assess the degree to which people felt the goals, procedures and outcomes were considered important, acceptable and also meaningful to those involved. So to really kind of get some feedback from people on how they felt it went. And then lastly, to refine an implementation model for potential broader application within adult social care contexts, which we'll outline at the end of the presentation in terms of what we've done and some of the next steps for the kind of moving forwards. So yeah, 3 kind of key study objectives were to strengthen, assess and refine. I thought it might be helpful to provide a little bit of context, so the people are aware of where we did the piece of work. So in terms of Norfolk, there was lots of great individual work being completed, so we really saw that, but barriers to sustain positive outcomes for people kind of persisted. Now, a lot of you are probably familiar with some of these barriers, but they included things such as staff turnover, lack of resources, and or buy-in from people. And actually attending the previous talk on the practitioner's definition, very much kind of still kind of prevalent in terms of some of those barriers that people might be finding, as well as just kind of knowing what PBS is more generally. We know that being able to support effective long-term change for an individual is dependent on the appropriate systems and processes being in place. And this is what really highlighted for us the need for effective system-wide support. For Norfolk specifically, a substantial investment as well had happened kind of in PBS training, which was funded through the council, and the system-wide PBS service offering aimed to kind of support with really embedding this training into practice. So we kind of know from the research that classroom training alone isn't always enough. So how kind of using this model of support, we can support with embedding that training into people's practice. And then lastly, kind of the long-term success of PBS within any organisation we know is dependent on system-wide change. So this really highlights the need for that effective organisational supports that are both time and resource efficient, something that was considered within the development of the model that we'll go on to discuss, so kind of really plan for that in terms of the bits that we did. Just for some further context as well, so generally the service is referred to as the PBS service, so in the feedback, etc., you'll see we refer to it as the PBS service. But when I reference to this throughout the presentation, I'm referring to the system-wide PBS model that we provided, opposed to kind of a PBS service that would typically provide sort of things like individual support, such as functional behavioural assessments, PBS plans. They were very much outside the scope of the project. The project very much focused on that system-wide PBS level of support. So, in terms of, for those of you, like I said, that might not be as familiar with capable environments, I thought it might be helpful to provide some definitions. So I've got a couple of definitions to go through, one of them that you'll be able to see on the slide. But capable environments can be defined as a systematic, theoretically driven approach that aims to increase life quality outcomes and well-being. This is while simultaneously reducing and or preventing behaviours that challenge. And this was defined by Hume, Kahn and Riley in their 2021 paper. And this outlined building capable environments using practice leadership. So kind of a really helpful paper in terms of understanding what that is and a really useful definition. McGill and his colleagues in 2021 also defined capable environments as being underpinned by behavioural analytic principles, and the fact that capable environments really emphasises the role of environmental determinants and contextual factors in shaping positive life quality outcomes and reducing the emergence and the maintenance of behaviours that challenge. So in terms of the purpose of this study, we focus on the 3 organisational domains, which you can see here. So these are the mindful and skilled workers, so essentially your staff team, effective management support, so the service managers within the services and kind of management structure, and then the effective organisational context, so considering the wider kind of organisation and the context within that. The other 9 domains that you can see on the slide kind of are more around the individual level supports or individual level domains, and this covers things such as meaningful activity, choice, communication, etc. But for the purpose of this study, we focus on those 3 kind of highlighted organisational domains. So our rationale and supporting literature for the study, albeit small, there is an emerging evidence base for system-wide supports being implemented in adult services, supporting individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And kind of within the paper, we outline the available evidence in the literature review, but kind of to give you a bit of a summary, the key elements. The first section focuses on positive behaviour support. So we do things such as defining PBS and acknowledging that whilst PBS has gained significant traction within the UK in terms of policy and practice landscape, those empirical evaluations of its effectiveness as a systemic organisation-wide model remain a little bit limited. So something we really want to consider in terms of how we can build upon that evidence base. We then explored the system-wide PBS, which extends the PBS framework by embedding universal targeted supports within the infrastructure of service organisations. This was defined by Kincaid in 2018 in their article. In terms of more robust UK-based evidence for system-wide PBS, this comes from a cluster randomised controlled trial, which was completed by McGill and colleagues in 2018. And this demonstrated significant improvements in support quality alongside reductions in behaviours that challenge. In terms of some of the interventions in that paper, they looked at things like proactive staff support, developing leadership skills, and that kind of environmental restructuring to be able to support with some of those aims. Kearney and colleagues in both her 2020 and 2023 papers also looked at kind of building upon this and emphasising that sustainable PBS implementation requires more than just that frontline practice change. They talk a lot about outlining the multi-element or multi-level organisational alignment and kind of having engaged and competent leadership with ongoing supervisions and reflective practices. All of those things are really essential kind of components for sustained PBS implementation. The reference you can see on the slide talks about kind of from their 2024 paper, kind of really further advances that work, and it's a really useful paper because it offers a comprehensive practice-based model that integrates those tier 1 quality benchmarks, includes things such as their structured fidelity assessment tool and also a phased implementation sequence designed to embed PBS across complex service systems. So this provides a real useful addition to the literature, which aims to kind of address some of those real known barriers, so things like the staff turnover, staff burnout, the bits I mentioned earlier, and also variability in management practice. So we know kind of having that kind of good management structure in place, that managers are really upskilled, etc., is going to be really important. So by kind of having that in place, it kind of provides a critical bridge between that implementation science and positive behaviour support. And the paper offers real practical tools to support scalable and sustainable system-wide PBS adoption in adult social care. And we discuss how we've utilised some of this kind of research in our paper, especially towards the later end in the updated model. The last section then, of a reference to capable environment specifically, 2 studies, and we kind of highlighted capable environment's utility as a framework. These are papers by McGill and colleagues in 2018, and the paper I mentioned in the previous slide by Hume and colleagues in 2021. Capable environments, or kind of a distinctive feature of capable environments, lies in its emphasis on the organisational conditions that support staff practice, particularly kind of that leadership, coaching and systemic supports. So kind of whilst we know that early research utilising the framework is primarily focused on applying it at the individual level, so as I mentioned, kind of those 9 individual domains, actually it's really increasingly recognised as kind of critical determinants in sustainable PBS implementation, so kind of looking at those 3 areas as well. Some examples of how capable environments might be able to support with this includes things like practice leadership. So as I mentioned the paper earlier, focus on how kind of capable environments can support with practice leadership, think about supervision quality, and then also embedding kind of real reflective learning culture within services. So kind of in terms of all the practice that we do, being really reflective is key, and kind of learning from our mistakes generally, and kind of how we can move things forward. If we can do all of this really well, then this can really aim to support with increasing consistency, kind of staff competence and staff well-being. And we know if we get those right, actually this can in turn lead to a real better quality of life for the individual supported, which is always kind of our main aim, is making sure that people we support have a really good quality of life, but making sure everyone that supports that individual is really well supported as well. So by implementing this framework, that helps with that too. So into our participants and setting. In terms of the participants that took part in the study, they comprise of 2 kind of very different organisations in terms of where they were at when we started. So both organisations support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities within Norfolk. Organisation 1 supported 6 adults by the conclusion of the project and employed approximately 40 staff to support the 6 individuals. At the time of the project, the service were in the process of becoming established, and therefore were not actively providing support at the start. So they were in the process of setting up the service, so didn't actually kind of support any individuals at the start. But during the course of the project, individuals began to transition into the service. But at the outset, kind of the 2 key working party members were the registered manager and the deputy manager. For organisation 2, this was much larger in size in comparison. So they had approximately 550 staff and around 900 people with lived experience, so people that access their services. The working groups kind of comprised of the training and quality director, members of the PBS team, and also included service and team managers. So it wasn't just focused on the kind of the PBS team. Actually, lots of different kind of people were invited to those working party meetings to be part of the kind of project. Across both organisations, all participants had completed at least a 1-day PBS kind of training course, so generally the PBS informed training course. Some also had things like they were certified intervention trainers, and a couple of people held kind of more formal PBS qualifications up to a level 4. And this reflected kind of a range of PBS knowledge and experience within kind of the people that were involved in the project. Each organisation, however, was kind of at very different stages or different stages as prior to the pilot. The intervention was purposely designed to enhance and embed PBS practices through structured organisation supports. In terms of kind of the people that supported with the project, so as I mentioned, Jen was the other consultant that supported. We're both UKBA certs and were involved throughout all stages of the project. And our role primarily was to provide guidance and oversight right through from the initial scoping call, kind of right through to delivery and evaluation. We'll talk about the model in a little while, so that makes a little bit more sense then. Our input ensured kind of alignment with UK standards for pay for analytic practice and kind of fidelity to the capable environments framework. A lot of organisations aren't necessarily very familiar with the capable environments framework, so it's really important to have people to kind of guide that and upskill people in knowing kind of what that framework was and how we were going to apply it. Just in terms of ethical approval as well, just so you're all aware, ethical approval for the paper was not required, but we did adhere to informed consent throughout, and kind of both organisations that participated were very happy to kind of provide consent. And both organisations have since had representatives move on to begin working towards a level 6 PBS qualification delivered through PBS Matters, which we felt really demonstrated their desire to continue to expand on their skill set and their PBS kind of internal PBS knowledge. I think some of the teams are also here today, so hello to them as well. And yeah, hopefully I do it justice in terms of what we did. So kind of 2 key measures that were used in the study. Kind of the first measure was around the capable environments audit tool. And this was developed collaboratively between ourselves and 2 clinicians within Norfolk, so Lucy and Tash that I mentioned earlier. When we developed the tool, this involved kind of us collaborating with them and kind of some helpful context. Lucy is an occupational therapist and Tash is a learning disability nurse who both held masters in positive behaviour support. What was really helpful though was that they were both kind of clinicians working within Norfolk, and that meant they had kind of real valuable direct insight into the context and support structures within Norfolk, and their knowledge and practical experience inform the theory, context and relevance of the tool. So we really be able to apply the tool and think about specifically when we're breaking down each domain into what kind of was really meaningful, what were kind of the key things they'd seen across Norfolk, and kind of how we can embed that within the tool to make sure we were targeting those elements as well. Secondly, a social validity questionnaire was developed and administered via Microsoft Forms. It's quite good now, Microsoft Forms, I'm getting quite a whiz on it. You can kind of create the form, you can then put a QR code, and it's really accessible in terms of people can then scan the form just using the QR code. And that, I'm sure it's probably been around a lot longer, but certainly only recently I've become a lot more familiar with it. But kind of the Microsoft form captured participants' perceptions regarding sort of the acceptability, feasibility, but also the perceived impact of the intervention. So thinking about kind of what did they get out of the intervention, and we'll kind of look at the measure in a little bit more detail later. Essentially, it had 18 kind of closed-ended items rated on a 5-point scale. And this ranged from sort of strongly agree down to strongly disagree. And then there was an additional kind of not applicable option. So, for example, some of the working party members that might not have joined until sort of later on, there was a question around sort of the initial part of the kind of intervention. And actually that wouldn't have been relevant to them. So they're able to select not applicable if that was more relevant. In terms of the items on the social validity measure, this looked at things such as kind of the relevance of the study or the relevance of the interventions, and kind of how they perceived kind of the confidence in applying the intervention strategy. So how confident were they that it would make a change essentially, and how confident were they that they felt it would make a difference in kind of key areas we were looking to target. So things like quality of life, improvements, reduction in restrictive practices, those sort of areas. We also included 2 open-ended items at the very bottom of the survey, and this kind of invited respondents to identify any anticipated barriers to implementation and provide any kind of further feedback on the support received during the project. And we'll kind of go on to look at some of those kind of feedbacks moving forward. But actually it was really helpful to provide the opportunity, because as much as they might have felt kind of all those things they strongly agreed with or might have agreed with, actually providing the opportunity to identify any barriers meant that we were able to kind of plan for that as well. So in terms of the procedure, here's a kind of an example of the tool that we use, or the model that we used, that kind of outlines the procedure. So the model was developed based on the relevant literature and our experiences to ensure successful outcomes for services. So it was very much tailored to meet the needs of each organisation. So whilst kind of you can see a set model here, it was very much kind of flexible in terms of how it was then applied to each organisation. It kind of wasn't a one-size-fits-all. It kind of really aimed to assist with embedding PBS into the overarching systems and processes. So like I said earlier, kind of you won't see any kind of functional assessment developed, no kind of PBS plans developed. It was looking at those overarching systems and processes that really support with embedding PBS within organisations. The intervention consisted of a brief consultant-led system-wide PBS implementation kind of package, so to speak. And it was structured around those 3 kind of organisational domains of the capable environments checklist. So the 3 kind of that are highlighted on the earlier slides, so thinking about the mindful and skilled workers, the effective management support, and the effective organisational context. So in terms of kind of the model, you can see to start with, it starts with a scoping call. So this typically lasted around an hour, and it would just be an online call via Teams. And it kind of allowed for Jen and I to introduce ourselves, discuss the scope of the project, so essentially give the kind of the service this model, and kind of go through what that would look like in terms of the support. We're able to get some basic information from the provider as well, in terms of kind of the how many services the people that the service support, any PBS training they might have already had, and just identifying anything that we might need to consider when we move forward. Following the scoping call, so if the provider felt that it was going to be something of benefit, then we kind of would set a date to visit an identified service to complete a scoping visit. For the first organisation, as I said, they were very much setting up. So the first few visits were very much kind of visiting a building site, which was great because we saw such progress in terms of kind of where the service was at initially to where it kind of ended up by the evaluation element. And for the second organisation, as I said, it was a much larger organisation. So we visited sort of target services that we were going to be looking at. During the scoping visit, we'd complete observations. So kind of go and meet people, say hello, kind of see the support, see the environment, and then kind of meet key stakeholders. So thinking about kind of who was most helpful to talk to, so getting some feedback from the staff, and then completing the CAPE environment assessment. So generally we'd kind of get key people involved in that meeting to then go through the CAPE environments tool and kind of get providers to score themselves where they felt they were at. By doing the tool, that's kind of what then developed our kind of proposal. So using the tool, using the observations, using the feedback from providers, we then develop a proposal, which you can see is kind of the third stage. And that kind of is developed collaboratively. So we wanted providers to be part of that process. So we'd go through in the scope and visit all the kind of key bits, and they'd let us know what they felt was a priority. This was because it kind of equated to roughly 10 to 12 days of consultants' time per kind of provider. So if we had a list of like 20 things, we might decide, okay, these bits will be prioritised initially, and then if time allows, we'll move on to those bits. So kind of, yeah, that proposal was developed on those key areas to target. We then kind of agree the proposal with all parties to make sure people were happy with it, make sure it was viable for the organisation, and then kind of we begin the implementation. So kind of that fourth bit is the implementing the recommendations through collaborative working party meetings. So we had kind of 5 to 6 working party meetings for the pilot study, which included representative kind of described earlier. So as I said, kind of for one service, it was just the registered manager and the deputy manager, and then moving forward for the kind of other people were included once kind of the service expanded. And then for the second service or the second organisation, kind of there was kind of the PBS team training people, and as well as the service managers, etc. Across those kind of working party meetings, we'd set out like kind of agenda before each session, so everyone knew kind of what we were going to be discussing. We'd agree agendas, make sure everyone was happy with them, and then within that working party, we would work on those actions that were kind of outlined in the agenda. The reason for having the working groups rather than just us providing it was to aim to kind of increase buy-in from the service, so they felt that the things we were targeting were meaningful and were going to help. So yeah, by doing it within the working party, some of the previous research I kind of gave as well, that really helped with ensuring everyone felt included, and something we felt was really important to make sure that kind of things sustained as well. So, for example, in terms of the CAPE environments domains, for mindful and skilled workers, priorities might include things like reflective supervision, modelling PBS consistent support, and embedding things like practice leadership. And that's to really sustain that high quality support. Within the effective management and supports, that second kind of area or the second domain of the organisation or CAPE environments domains, we think about kind of prioritising embedding PBS principles into supervision and performance processes, improving things like debriefing or carrying out kind of debriefing and what that would look like for organisations, and then having clear kind of transition and referral pathways. If managers were being the ones that were kind of going out to assess people, kind of how can we make sure they're really clear in terms of what that pathway looked like, and making sure we've got all the information that we need. And then for effective organisational context, priorities included things like developing that PBS infrastructure. So if like the second organisation had an internal PBS team, how we can support with those referral pathways, and thinking about having the right templates. So kind of creating those plan templates or reviewing those, and kind of any criteria that was required for that plan use. So it wasn't the case that everyone then suddenly got a PBS plan, actually kind of what was the system to notify if people then were requiring that. And kind of additionally thinking about promoting that organisational learning through leadership engagement and staff development. Kind of to operationalise these priorities, a series of those targeted actions were implemented, and kind of we worked on those collaboratively with the teams to make sure that they were really on board with what we were doing, but actually they really knew how to use the tools. So rather than just providing a service with like, here's a debriefing tool, kind of go and implement it, it was okay, let's structure it to that context, let's make it really relevant, and actually what is the supporting system going to be in place to be able to enable that to be effectively implemented and sustained over time. So that all happened during the implementation. We'll look at an example of the Cape Environments tool moving forward anyway, which hopefully will make that nice and clear for everybody. Lastly then, during the evaluation session, so we'd do a follow-up Cape Environments audit. So as I said, the checklist, we'd then rescore the whole checklist. And this was to assess changes in organisational practices. So participants also completed the social validity questionnaire, so the 2 measures that I mentioned, and that was to evaluate the acceptability, feasibility and the perceived impact of the intervention. So really understanding how people felt the intervention had gone, and also allowed for us to think about future learning as well. So that is an overview of the procedure and the structure in which that we followed. In terms of Cape Environments tool example, so there's an example provided within the paper which gives a snapshot of that tool. The tool was very comprehensive in nature, so we definitely wouldn't be able to fit the whole tool on a PowerPoint slide. But essentially, each domain was broken down into a minimum of 6 subsections, but some might have had up to 11 subsections. This example covers the 3 organisational domains with a sample subsection and description of what was assessed. So hopefully you can see that okay on the slide. But if we take the first one as an example, for the mindful and skilled worker domain, the subsection or the sample subsection included within the example is debriefing and wellbeing. So something I'm sure a lot of us are really passionate about, making sure we've got that in place for our staff, especially when they're dealing with really tricky events. So in terms of the description for what was assessed, was identifying if staff engage in reflective supervision and debriefing to understand the context of behaviours of concern and plan supportive person-centred responses. So that's one of the things we were quite keenly looking for, and we'd ask the organisation to reflect on that. We then get them to give a score, and we'll go through the scoring in a bit more detail. But these scores then inform those proposal areas, as I mentioned on the previous slide. So if they scored themselves slightly lower, that might flag an area for us to be looking at to include within that proposal. One thing that's really key, especially for anyone else that's planning on doing something similar, is we'd always encourage the organisation to provide real reflective scores. It's really tricky for organisations. Generally, they're used to things like CQC coming out, PAMS inspections, those kind of things. And actually you feel like you need to score yourself really highly. Certainly I definitely have experienced that in services too, where actually you think, oh, it's got to be 100%, just in case someone, comes and looks at this really critically. Actually really reassured organisations that it just be honest, because the more honest you can be at this point, actually the outcome at the evaluation stage, you're going to see that progress, and actually that's going to be really reinforcing for organisations. So say they scored themselves at 20% initially, through the work that was provided as part of the PBS service and the work that they continue to do, actually then by doing that you'll then see that increase at the end. Whereas obviously if they score themselves 100% at the start, by the time they get to the end, there's no room for movement, and it's unlikely that every organisation would score themselves 100% initially, because we always know there's always room for improvement. But can be really tricky for organisations to reflect on that and give that honest feedback. But we hope we built that rapport with them at the outset to make sure people felt they were able to provide an accurate and honest score of where they were at. The areas included within the proposal of input were then targeted, as I said, for increase during the working parties. So, for example, for the first section, we might be thinking about supervision forms would be reviewed. So depending on the supervision structure, it might be that it's just a review of the content. It might be a review of actually how supervisions are delivered and how they're prioritised. So if we think about organisations, especially larger organisations, but not necessarily always, supervisions can become a bit of a tick box exercise. So we've done a supervision every 12 weeks and that box is ticked, but actually making the supervisions really meaningful to people, and make sure we're targeting, as the description says, that the staff engage in that reflective supervision. And actually this really helps plan that supportive person-centred responses. So rather than just focusing on, is everything okay? Have you attended on time? Sort of really thinking about kind of, how we can promote supervisions to be a real useful sort of learning exercise for people. Some of the organisations I've definitely worked with historically as well have kind of used supervisions in a real negative way as well. It's like, oh, we'll have a supervision because you've done something wrong. And again, we want to be moving away from that sort of people dreading going to a supervision, because it's like, oh goodness, what have I not done? Actually, people come into supervisions looking forward to discussing and celebrating the kind of useful or the meaningful outcomes they've achieved over the course of the kind of that last supervision period. We might also do things like updating kind of debriefing systems, as I said, so making sure that people do get debriefs, but actually what does that look like? And that kind of will help support that area. In terms of the other two areas, so effective management and support, so PBS being embedded in supervisions and team meetings, to think about how managers are supporting with that PBS implementation. So some of the descriptions we were looking for are actually PBS principles are discussed routinely within supervisions and team meetings. So is there like an agenda template, for example, for the team meeting that would include things like PBS plans, and kind of, are they still working? Are they still effective? Is there anything we need to do? Now, slightly easier perhaps if organisations have internal PBS teams, but actually still relevant even if kind of as external support providing that, because it's really useful to provide them updates. We know kind of PBS plans should always be live documents and kind of reflective of the person's situation or circumstance. So being able to kind of regularly address those within team meetings allow for that shared learning as well. And things like practice leadership as well, so ensuring managers are able to identify kind of good practice leaders, and how we're supporting those people to really develop the team as well, especially where like there might be managers that manage multiple homes. So within that, how can we make sure we've got, when management presence isn't there, that all those things still occur, and kind of having those real useful practice leaders. And then lastly, for the effective organisation context, the kind of sample subsection included there is PBS training and systems alignment. So kind of, is PBS embedded within organisation systems through kind of clear referral pathways, accessible plan templates, and coordinated training across departments? So not just kind of that online e-learning 1 hour, kind of everyone can click through really quickly and just answer the quiz and hope for the best at the end. Actually, how do we make sure that PBS is really embedded, that when you talk to staff, they're showcasing their real PBS knowledge, and how the organisation is then supporting and maintaining that. So thinking about kind of, those clear referral pathways, and actually are plans accessible, and kind of, do people have updated plans, and all those areas as well. So really kind of useful to consider. As I said, the tool is really comprehensive. This is just kind of an example of some of those sections, but kind of gives you a flavour of some of the bits that we looked at for organisations. Susie, I'm seeing quite a lot of, I haven't looked at the chat, but is there anything burning urgent I need to cover now?
People asking about the keywords, but they haven't missed any, have they? So that's fine.
No, it's coming up, I promise.
There's been a couple of questions which Jo has answered, so.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Jo. I'm really conscious I don't want to look at and become quite distracted. So if there's anything, just shout at me. In terms of example organisational work, then here's sort of some pictures or snapshots of some of those organisational kind of permanent products developed during the project. So it was kind of a mixture of those permanent products developed, but also kind of, those systems and processes, and making sure that people were clear on that. In terms of examples of what we've kind of outlined within that proposal and targeted improvements, or that we targeted for improvement, would be supporting with incident report analysis. So often we know that organisations may collect this data, but sometimes kind of what's then done with this data can be a little bit overlooked. So I'm sure we've kind of all experienced, I definitely have, services where the staff really helpfully collect kind of data. So they might fill in incident forms, they might fill in ABCs, scatter plots, and actually kind of you ask what's done with that data, and sometimes it's just filed in the person's file. A manager might kind of sign it off, but actually there's no sort of looking at the bigger picture, looking for those trends, looking at those patterns. So part of what we did was looking at kind of that, kind of what is done with that, and kind of how can we support with managers or kind of team leads being able to support with that analysis. So it was really simple, really easy to do, but actually we're still looking at those key elements and making sure that we're not missing really helpful information that staff are providing. Also kind of increases staff buy-in for completing the forms if you know something is being done with it, and then again that's presented at your team meeting. So Chloe's incident data for the last 12 months is shared, and this month we've seen a reduction. We kind of, yeah, we're really pleased about that. Staff go, oh, do you know what, actually it's really helpful, that data I provided is really shown and it's kind of been looked at and analysed. Whereas if they think it's yeah, just going in a file to gather dust somewhere, it's kind of, yeah, the motivation for completing it certainly diminishes. Other things sort of included were assessment and referral pathways, and this has been a real frequent area that's come up with kind of we've been requested support with, and largely that's owing to wanting to know as much information and how we gather kind of that real helpful information before a person transitions. So we know sometimes it can be really tricky to get that information and to get honest and accurate information, but actually if we kind of can develop tools that cover a lot of those areas, that will really help us with knowing the person as well as possible, alongside everything else we need to do with an assessment, so going and doing your observations, meeting with the staff team, etc. But kind of having that referral form and knowing kind of gathering as much information and asking the right questions and thinking about those things that might be sort of a red flag. So for example, somebody that might have mobility issues, actually looking at going to assess them for an upstairs bedroom, actually like kind of acknowledging that right from the get-go and going, okay, well, this isn't the most appropriate. Is there any scope to kind of change the bedroom they might be going into or change the kind of location? If not, is it viable to proceed with this before you've spent 6 weeks kind of going through the kind of whole assessment and transition process before you realise that actually it's not going to be possible? By also having that kind of real clear and thorough assessment process, it helps support that kind of avoiding placement breakdowns as well, and making sure that we kind of got everything that we need from the get-go, including making sure the staff have had the right training and support. We've also targeted sort of staff wellbeing, as I said, so thinking about kind of the bits and pieces that will help with the staff wellbeing. You can see an example there of PERMA being used, so Martin Seligman's PERMA model. So how we can implement kind of the PERMA model within staff wellbeing, within the staff supervision as well. So not necessarily outside of that, but how we can utilise that within a supervision session. We've also supported with specific areas and interventions where a need for this has been identified. You can see a bit of an example there, it's a little bit covered, but in terms of building rapport for people, so how we support with developing rapport. And again, this could be utilised just with general staff teams, but actually kind of with new starters, or if you're using agency and relief workers. That was kind of the aim of kind of that tool, was how we develop rapport with people and kind of can build rapport. Other bits and pieces that are not kind of shown on the screen include things like PBS policy development and refinement, so looking at PBS policies, reviewing those, making sure it encompasses everything that we needed or the organisation wanted, and then developing tools that form part of that policy. So for example, when a PBS plan might be required versus when a support plan might be sufficient. There was an earlier kind of comment in a previous talk that was talking about sort of the different tiers of support, and actually kind of understanding where people sit within that framework within kind of that continuum of positive behaviour support, and actually are they sitting in that tier 3, or can we just kind of ensure the appropriate sort of good practices in place for people, that real person-centred approach, as some other examples. Data analysis then, so kind of data analysis that was carried out during the study included quantitative data from the Capable Environments audit tool, and that was scored kind of across all 12 domains. Even though we targeted those 3 organisational areas, we kind of scored all 12 domains, and the purpose of this was then to think about, was there any kind of generalisation across other domains? We did a percentage change, kind of we calculated that for each domain, but the kind of statistical analysis focused specifically on those 3 organisational level domains, given kind of that we targeted those ones. We looked at kind of targeting those 3 organisational domains per provider, and kind of rather than thinking about that individual level data, and kind of were treated as the unit of analysis. We did some paired sample t-tests, kind of we'll go through the example, the kind of results of that in a little while, and then the qualitative responses from the social validity questionnaires were also looked at and thematically analysed. So in terms of the results, organisation 1, kind of here's a summary of them. So it was converted to percentages due to the different total scores. As I said, some were kind of 6, some were 11. And they were scored from 1 to 5. So in organisation 1, you can see the 3 targeted organisation domains showed clear gains. However, improvements were also seen in several of the others, if not all of the others, not directly targeted by the intervention. So that was kind of a real positive. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to flick through these quickly. This is kind of visually kind of presented, so kind of you can see the pre and post scores in the black and the grey, and those are the 3 kind of areas. Organisation 2, again, kind of improvements were seen across the 3 targeted domains, but they kind of there was no meaningful changes observed in the wider ecological domain, suggesting that those early gains remained localised to the areas targeted during the intervention period. And again, just visually shown. Keyword 1 is tornado. So if anyone that's collecting the keywords, it is tornado. Social validity outcomes then. Both quantitative and qualitative data were collected, and the responses indicated high acceptability, relevance and feasibility. So 3 key themes were identified. So positive experience and facilitation. So kind of participants acknowledged and praised the facilitator's knowledge, approachability and the structured nature of the sessions. The implementation barriers, so time constraints, resistance to change among some staff and competing service priorities come up kind of as barriers. And then perceived value and future use, so respondents valued practical focus on intervention and expressed optimism regarding the sustainability, and particularly if supported by ongoing engagement and leadership kind of throughout. Some other data was provided for one of the organisations. So 100% of the staff team reported they were happy in their role. They had 100% staff retention during 2024 and 100% reduction in behaviours that challenged for one individual. So they'd gone from 60 per month to 0, and that had maintained for 1 year. So that was some really exciting feedback provided. I'm hoping this will work. So Chris was really willing to provide us with some feedback to share about kind of the outcomes achieved. But I'm conscious I'm not sure I clicked the button to share the sound. So if I start it, Susie, can you let me know if it's not playing?
It's really helpful, and it's been really good.
Quite quiet, but it's playing.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if it's like you can hear it through share computer sound. Let me try this and see if this is any better.
Together, it was really helpful, and it's been really good along for the whole journey. It's what you guys helped us do was sort of get everything rolling and gave some really planted the seed, as it were, of what's been able to grow out of that. And it was having you guys there at the beginning when we had that time was really, really helpful. It did allow us to really embed this into the service, and it's clear that, I mean, it's almost evidence for why PBS works. It's a service like this. If you focus on people's quality of life, you will get better outcomes. People will enjoy their life more. The need for restrictive interventions will massively reduce, and your staff turnover will be better. And you're not doing anything crazy or out of the ordinary, or you're just making sure that people are happy, and that's lovely feeling for all the staff and for the guys and for their families and for everyone, really.
Hopefully you all caught as much of that as possible, because I thought it was a really kind of powerful clip to show, with the outcomes the service has achieved kind of being testament to significant work that Chris and the team are putting into really embedding PBS within the service. And I know he kind of very much plays it down there in terms of you're not doing anything crazy, but actually they've worked really hard to embed PBS within that service, and kind of shows in terms of the results obtained. So massive thanks for Chris for allowing me to share the video. I won't go through some other kind of feedbacks, I'm conscious of time, but kind of on the slide there, you can just see some of the other feedback provided, that kind of, it was really nice to hear from services that actually they felt it was really beneficial to be part of it. They felt it was moving kind of PBS forward within the organisation, and actually just being able to get together as a team. Quite often those things are quite simple, but actually really allow kind of that peer support and shared learning to take place. Summary findings then, so results taken from the measures that we use within the study are kind of displayed here. So kind of in terms of the capable environment scores, they significantly improve from pre-intervention to post-intervention, and social validity outcomes and feedback provided indicated high acceptability, contextual relevance and perceived benefits for staff competence, leadership engagement and alignment with PBS principles. So kind of this combined with the provider feedback shared indicate really promising early indicators of intervention impact and the potential utility of the model in supporting that organisational change. So what we learned then, we learned a lot. We also were very pleased with the outcomes achieved, but kind of the study outlines a number of kind of limitations that we learned from doing this pilot. So time and resource allocation and buy-in from providers. So kind of a lot of, there was a number of providers that were also invited to be part of the process, but competing priorities made it really difficult for them to engage. So things like high staff turnover, CQC actions, lack of time and resources. It's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario in that actually the support would really help kind of target some of those things, but actually people being able to facilitate the time to be part of the working groups and be part of the process is also then really tricky for people. And we reflected on this in the tool, and kind of whilst comprehensive in nature, actually like even just scoring the tool takes a significant amount of time that it's hard for people to be able to free up. In terms of the time though, we did aim to have kind of that 10 to 12 days. We purposely tried to limit it. Again, 10 to 12 days for people is still quite a lot of time for services to give up. We also really learned that including person and organisation specific domains. So I know I whizzed through the results, but actually, like I said, for that kind of second organisation, actually the kind of the impact of those system-wide areas hadn't then kind of reached the individual level domains, largely owing to the fact that obviously with a big organisation, it takes time to get things approved, to get things rolled out, kind of you have to get relevant sign-offs, etc. So that might have accounted for some of that. But actually kind of making sure we're targeting that person specific and organisation domains is going to be really important. For larger organisations, linking to what I just kind of discussed, instead of trying to embed across all, kind of having that pilot service that kind of we initially roll out in and then kind of cascade to the wider organisation. That means that then if there is changes needed, we want to update a form once it's been rolled out, we want to change kind of the system slightly. It's much easier to do that rather than trying to change it across kind of a huge amount of services. Working parties also to include members from all levels of the organisation and actually to really target kind of people with lived experience as well. So making sure that their voice is heard, whilst everyone's always kind of involved as much as possible. Actually, generally, it was just during the scoping visit that they might kind of been able to provide their input. One of the things we were really passionate about moving forward is actually how can we tailor the working party meetings so that people are able to have a voice, they're able to kind of have a say in the systems, have a say in how their incident forms are going to be looked at, how they're going to be analysed, and actually what part of the process they want to be, like kind of what part they want to play in that process. So that was something we kind of definitely learned and said we'd really like to kind of consider moving forward. And then lastly, kind of that competency assessing and data collection methods. So we want to ensure those in kind of receipt of the service we're providing are really proficient in what we're supporting with. And in turn, we can be really like much more certain that this is being achieved. So kind of thinking about how we can include that and reviewing of the data collection methods and what can be kind of accounted for without adding lots of response effort for people. We also relied obviously on self-reported social validity measures, and that might introduce things like response bias and that kind of absence of that direct observational data that was collected. So whilst we've done the observations, kind of specifically collecting data on that would have allowed us to triangulate findings or assess changes in that frontline staff behaviour. Also, in terms of the limitations included within the paper are things like the fact that it was a small sample size to organisations, so that should be considered as well. Having said all that, kind of the main objective of the pilot was to explore the practical implementation and contextual relevance of the capable environments framework rather than to establish experimental controls. It's really lovely we published the paper will be coming out on it, but actually our aim was never to kind of think about the research, it was about what can we do to really support organisations to embed PBS. Next steps then, so some of the bits that we've reflected on. We've been really fortunate enough to be able to have the opportunity to put some of our lessons learned into practice, and we're now working on a much larger scale project that will see up to 80 organisations be supported through the kind of the model. So we've made some refinements based on kind of what we've learned. So we'll make sure providers are self-referring where possible. We'll identify one target service. We'll include person-specific as well as organisational domains. the working party to be developed from the outset with all important stakeholders and make sure it's really clear the expectations. We'll further develop our capable environments tool and checklist. It will include the further competency checks or behaviour skills training for both restrictive practice and capable environments. And the model will be streamlined with clear objectives for each working group. So this is kind of presented a little bit easier to understand in terms of the updated model. So we would still have the kind of scoping visit or the scoping call, the scoping visit, and then this is what the updated model looks like. So everyone's kind of really clear in terms of what kind of they're getting. So some of the biggest changes are kind of a structure of 4 working parties, so reducing that time required from organisations. Working party 1 would have a restrictive practice session and 2 areas of proposal action. So one of the key kind of goals of the model was to look at reducing restrictive practices. So in that session, we would look at kind of a checklist of the kind of any restrictive practices that might be in place, and then support the organisation with a review of those with the aim to kind of reduce some of those. Working party 2 would have a session on the first identified section of the capable environment. So as I said, the 2 lowest scoring areas, we would target the first one in working party 2. We'd do 1 to 2 proposal areas and a restrictive practice check-in. Working party 3 would have the same kind of structure as working party 2. So the second identified section of the capable environment and 1 to 2 proposal areas and a check-in from the capable environment session. Working party 4 would do some observations, post-support measures, review of the proposal, and then the evaluation would include further data collection to kind of evaluate impact, and that would include those social validity measures. So whistle-stop tour of that, but essentially that's kind of what the model ended up looking like for the kind of new project, and thought really helpful to share in terms of something that hopefully, obviously, when we eventually look at potentially publishing that, what that kind of looked like for anyone that is hoping to implement something similar. In terms of future research then, so our paper outlines some implications and recommendations for future research.
Sorry, we have 5 minutes to the end of your session.
Perfect. I'm nearly at the second keyword, so we're nearly there. Thank you, Susie. In terms of further investigation into both organisational and person-specific capable environments domains is warranted, including evaluating the refined implementation model over extended timeframes, including individuals with lived experience across all stages. As I mentioned, something we felt really passionate about. That scalable workforce development strategies, including the train-the-trainer model, and identifying and addressing the operational contingencies that limited participation and engagement. So those things like staff turnover, etc., those barriers that we mentioned were going to be really important. Keyword 2, so Kansas is your second keyword. In terms of references, they're all kind of provided here, and I'm very happy to share slides as well at the end if anyone would like to look at anything in more detail. But with 4 minutes to spare for questions, contact details are on there, so Supporting Positivity's website, and also my email if anyone has got any specific questions they would like asked. I'm very happy for people to contact me. But yeah, Susie, I'm not sure if we've had any questions as we've gone through that Joe's not been able to answer, or anything that wants
You in the Q&A, I'm just checking, I think Joe has answered quite a few of them. It's about reference materials. There was one question about whether you were able to distinguish between genuine culture change and more procedural compliance.
Well, that's a good one. So in terms of, I suppose that's why the second lot of observations were really key. So going back in and kind of observing to see if we've seen that change. So rather than we've just ticked a box and implemented a debriefing system, actually looking at how that was embedded in process and the practicalities of doing so really meant that we were able to go like, actually, no, this had improved. And speaking to people, so speaking to staff. So if, for example, they were communicating at the scoping visit, they've never had a debrief, and then going back and asking people, have you had a debrief now they've been involved in an incident that required it, and how they found that as well. So really making sure that people had felt the impact of the intervention rather than it just being sort of, that they've now kind of ticked a box and gone through a debrief. As one example, hopefully that sort of answers it.
There was another related question in the chat around whether you had any tools for measuring attributions around behaviours that people were displaying.
Yeah, no, so that was one of the provider, and one of the providers provided some feedback in terms of that reduction in behaviours of concern, but not something we measured specifically.
More about people's attributions about where the behaviour was happening, whether you measured.
Oh, sorry. So in terms of the initial model, no, we didn't kind of look at that. It was very much sort of that subjective feedback obtained. But in the updated model, certainly started to look at some of those bits and how we can pull that out, and looking at kind of again, because the kind of the evidence base is slightly limited in terms of that system-wide aspect, and actually how we can pull some of those bits out from some of those standardised measures that are out there.
Brilliant, thank you, Chloe. Just see if there are any more in the Q&A. There's been various requests for tools and links to articles, which I think Joe has been answering. Anything else from the chat that I've missed, John?
No, someone just asked for both keywords again, but I put it in the chat.
Yeah, I put the keywords in.
Yeah.
A question. Sorry, that was fantastic, Chloe. Thank you so much. It's been really.
I realised I spoke really quickly, so I hope everyone caught up with me. I realised when I looked at the time, I was like, oh, like, yeah, we need to speed up a little bit. So I hope everyone was with me. You might have to slow down the recording slightly to make sure everyone could keep up.
A question if people could put in the chat. Tia, who's obviously organising today, just wanted to check whether people are starting to get their CEUs from the earlier talks today, whether they're starting to come through. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, no. Yes, not yet. Yes, yes, yes.
Oh God. Right.
Looks like more yeses than nos.
Okay.
Yes, from the previous two.
So it should be coming through from Eventbrite. So those who haven't had it, please check your junk. And then if it doesn't appear, do email me and let me know, but you'll need to tell me which talks.
Yeah. Did everybody hear that? Okay, so they should be coming from Eventbrite. If you're not getting it,
Check junk.
check your junk mail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're still not getting it, email cmartin@pbsuk.org, but please do tell me remember to tell me which talk it is you need the form for.
Yes, so email Tia if you don't get it and it's not in your junk, and say which talk. Somebody's saying, does every talk have a CEU? There's some that don't they?
No,
Yeah.
there's a couple that don't. This one does.
Yeah, this one does.
There's one in each time slot that doesn't. So there wasn't for the
I can hear.
Dave Allen's definition of challenging behaviour was not CEUs. The second session was the safe masturbation was not CEUs. This session, there is one which is escaping. Oh, the co-production group is unfortunately not CEUable. And in the next session, it is the free learning event is not CEUable. The talks themselves, like when you booked them on Eventbrite, for those of you who managed that, thankfully most of you, did say sort of CEUs available or not, and it was in the brochure. There's a little banner on it if it's CEUs. Yes, you can. I'm just seeing the questions. Yes, if you watch it after the event, you will absolutely still be able to claim your CEUs. You'll have a password to let you do that. Okay. Details incoming in time.
Thank you, Tia. Anything else I've missed in the chat, John?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, someone's
Perfect.
use a UK SBA number in the.
Yes, there's a place to enter it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm seeing some really positive comments too, Chloe. Amazing work.
Sorry.
Thank you.
No, sorry, dog.
Yeah, no, apologies. I saw there was a comment about speaking fast as well, so I do apologise. I was really conscious of trying to get everything in so that I could, share everything that we've learned with you all.
I also didn't want to interrupt your flow by interrupting you in the middle of it, so I'd sent you a message, but yeah.
No, sorry. And in terms of the attributions, I just found that question in the chat as well. We also target some of that within the Cape Environments tool as well, so the pre and post, and part of that led to kind of discussions as well, which were then noted as part of the tool as well, which then were included in the proposal and then reviewed. So kind of, was slightly targeted, but not kind of a specific tool. It was embedded within the Cape Environments tool and within those sections.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Chloe. And I see your email contact details are there if anybody has any further questions. But that was really interesting. Brilliant talk.
Excellent. No, thank you ever so much for everyone attending. It was a pleasure.
We'll have a lunch break now, and then we'll be back for the last talks at what time?
1:45.
1:45. Yeah. Brilliant. See you all later, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.